afternoon, good evening, depending where you are receiving this message. My name is Fonton Daniel. I am speaking here from the great state of Texas, here in the United States. And I want to talk about the issues that is going on in the neighboring country, La Republique du Cameroon, especially the election that is just recently happened. There is one thing that the world still haven't taken note of, that French colonies in Africa, they will never organize any meaningful elections because France has always been the architect of maintaining status quo rather than maintaining an effective, genuine democratic government in the other French colony. Initially, France has never trained its colony for the maintenance of pluralistic democratic government, where an elected officials can easily transfer power from one to the next. And so France is always suspicious, and so they would rather prefer to have the old guns, the old dictatorship, rather than having a new, a meaningful democratic government. So France never allowed a pure democratic government and freedom. France always get hold and tightened every political genuine democratic government. You can agree with me that in the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, where the government initiated a policy that will allow the creation of its own currency, and that is for the political structure of the people of Equatorial Guinea. Of course, France, under the current president, is adamantly and refusing to allow such a procedure to take place. It is for the interest of the people of Equatorial Guinea and not for the interest of France. France can come as a political partner, business partner, not on the aspect of the country, and destabilize. And that is why when we look at what happens to the current image that is happening now, Professor Maurice Kamto he just won an elections, and La République is organizing a fraudulence. I know United States is still not at knowledge. I understand the policy of these great nations not to interfere for any nation's political affairs because they will not want other nations to interfere in the United States. But as a leader of the free world, and a leader where democracy prevailed, as a leader that understood the value of dignity of democratic government, and those countries that have not demonstrated leadership, genuine democratic government, it is an obligation that the United States must intervene to ensure that democratic government prevailed. It is the leadership of the free world, and the world look upon the United States to intervene for it, to make a meaningful and recognition that before the people. With respect to the people of Ambazonia, the Federal Republic of Ambazonia, the people of Ambazonia is no longer part of the neighboring country, La République du Cameroon. We have demonstrated that our current acting president and our cabinet that are currently languishing in La République jail, La République has no legal authority in whatsoever arrest and detain our member of our cabinet. And so I am bringing this attention to the people of these people of the Western society, and that we will not sit down, fold our arms, and romancing with this La République. We will use every avenue to protect and maintain and secure our territorial integrity. And we will demonstrate this. We have asked simple, genuine, effective leadership from the neighboring country, and they won't in any circumstances demonstrate that genuineness. So therefore, we must demonstrate that our strength, our might against the neighboring country, La République du Cameroon. We, once a nation, the same United Nations that have vehemently ignored especially the current leadership at the United Nations. Antonio Guterres is up to ask for his resignation and departure from the United Nations. He basically has no value to be a leadership of the helms of the United Nations. I think it's this time that the leaders of the free world to come onto the table and reevaluate whether the current United Nations structure needs completely restructure, because Antonio Guterres at the helm of the enterprise is absolutely redundant. And therefore, if we don't do this and ask for his resignations and reform the United Nations, we are heading to a collision. Imagine that the United Nations, instead of looking for leadership for people who are capable to provide a sound and meaningful leadership in the United Nations, instead, United Nations is being placed by the most cruel, especially the human rights group. The human right is led by the most cruel and the most brutal dictatorship. Imagine that the ongoing massacre that is going on in the people of Southern Cameroon. Article 1608 of the United Nations Charter, 1608 XV of the United Nations, genuinely granted the independence of the people of Southern Cameroon, now the Federal Republic of Ambazonian. There is no meaningful or legal document that allows La Republique over the people of Southern Cameroon. And yet, we find our people in the midst of atrocity, orchestrated by this government that lack responsibility. I am asking the world, is that the world we are building? I could imagine that former British Prime Minister that advocate for the formation of the United Nations, including with the President of the United States, Mr. William Churchill, imagine he is here and see the structure of the United Nations. He will have cardiac arrest because of the current structure and the frustration that is within the system. Imagine that someone that has no human right record is being placed at the helm of the United Nations. So, what then is the role of the United Nations? Let's talk about Professor Maurice Kamto. Why United States is still thinking that there will be a genuine democratic government that will happen, I can assure the world that there is none. La Republique has never in any circumstances organized any meaningful elections since France tabled the document of associations at the United Nations that was voted in 1960. Imagine former President Amadou Ahidjo was in power for 25 years and hand over power for this current brutal dictatorship, and he has been in power for 36 years. He's 86 years old. He's mentally deranged. He's suffering from psychosis. He's absolutely effective psychosis that lack knowledge, skills, and able to demonstrate a leadership. Instead, there are certain stewardship that surrounded him and placed him at the figurehead, despite the fact that his mentally is deranged. Let's look at some of the key actors. A meeting was held at the home of Famdongo. A meeting was held at the home of Famdongo. The purpose was led up by 12-member delegations and with the stewardship of the current regime. The purpose of the meeting was to think what are their plans, what are their options, and how can they deal with it. First is to ask Biya to persuade the husband to stay in power, because nothing will happen. Exactly as what they did in 1992 when John Frundi won the elections. Remember, when John Frundi won the election in 1992, it was the same mafia in Etudi that orchestrated and block every aspect that will allow a meaningful transfer of power. And it comes to the same clique within the same etude, sitting within the 12 members that were meeting in Famdongo home. They came to a certain conclusion, which I just recently said, that one, to persuade the wife of Biya to persuade the husband to stay in power for more 2 years, and the hope that they will be able to solve the Anglophone problems. Another problem was to use a military coup. The purpose of the military coup was to declare a martial law, and that will abolish the current political climate and instituted a military. And another point of the agenda was to start a massive tribalistic policy that would pitch against the Bamilekes versus the Wondos and the Betis. By so doing, they would describe it as an instability, and that will allow them more time to cancel the current elections as its structure. I'm sure the world is not aware of La République, and especially the French colony. I think it's time the world must come together and say no. And if the world doesn't do so, then they create unstable environment for the human dignity. With respect to the people of Southern Cameroon, with respect to the Federal Republic of Ambazonian, I want to bring to attention to the world that the people of Southern Cameroon, now the Federal Republic of Ambazonian, will not be having any dinner anytime soon with the neighboring country, La République du Cameroon. We are moving ahead. We are fortifying ahead our